What is going on, franchise world? I'm Nick Powills, joined by Charles Internicola. Today, we are going to be talking with David Weaver as we continue our series on Meet the Broker. David, I want to welcome you in. Thanks for spending some time with us. What I would love, sure. David, what I would love is frame where things are at in your life right now, and obviously as it relates to franchising, maybe the good, the bad, and the ugly. And how are you feeling about this year right
now? Interesting question. It's been a pretty interesting year in the franchise consulting space. First half of the year was actually pretty good. And, we had to manage the whole COVID situation. Looking forward to the second half of the year, I think that it's a little bit wait and see, right? So we've got a couple of positives, right? The franchising business gets stronger as the job market gets less attractive for senior level executives, and that possibly will happen going forward. But the franchising business gets pretty murky in a recession, given the banking and the banking's ability to lend money. So I'm not really sure. I think managing candidates' fear and anxiety about taking a big loan and making a big life change and all of those things is always a bit challenging for the candidate, and that's really where I spend most of my time, is helping people identify for themselves, how do they become a business owner? What does that really mean? Right? What does it mean to be a business owner as it relates to managing uncertainty, understanding the fear and anxiety that comes along with big decisions? And I always like to emphasize that anxiety is something that you just need to learn to get comfortable with, right? Because as a business owner, it doesn't really go away, and there's always another big challenge in front of you that you're going to need to face as well. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, appreciate that.
Sure.
David, I wasn't I appreciate your personal assessment of the industry, but then I love the focus back on your franchisee candidates and what you view as part of your role in helping them understand what it means to be a business owner. We have a lot of franchisors that look at these videos, and I'm sure you get franchisors that say, hey, David, what do I have to do to get you interested in our brand, right? So drawing on your point, right? But your point showed empathy and a real understanding of your clients, which is I need to help them understand what it means to be a business owner, to buy this franchise, and how to address those anxiety points. From a franchisor perspective, what do you recommend? What's a franchisor that does it right, that actually helps you with your job of teaching your candidates what it means to be a franchisor, helping them understand what it's going to mean to buy that franchise? What are you looking for in franchisors in terms of those conversations?
That's a really good question, and I could probably talk too long on this particular topic. What's important to me is that my candidate clearly understand what the value proposition is for being part of a franchise, right? And so the way that I want that I lead them to that is to say, I want you to focus on the franchise system and the franchise support. But answer your question, what does a franchisor deliver that would get me interested in that franchisor or showing that franchise over a different franchise? It would be a very clear, defined path for their franchisee candidates towards success. So what do I mean by that? Right? I mean the franchisor has vetted out and they actually know exactly what their customer acquisition strategy is, and they know what their customer acquisition cost is going to be. They have very strong operational plan in place for who you hire, how do you find them, once you find them and hire them, how do you onboard them to execute the thing that we're trying to get done, and that they've got some track record with franchisees, right? So whether a candidate is interested in an established franchisor or an emerging franchisor, because that level of expertise and or track record is going to be different, obviously. But of the franchises that you have in place, like how many of them are experiencing the things that I'm pointing out that are important?
David, if you think of franchisor X comes to you, and obviously the advice that you can give, most of them will probably say, cool, but here's how I want to do it. Like they definitely want you to facilitate more buyers into their brand, no matter what, but they don't want to do the heavy lifting to get there. Do you believe that franchisors believe that how much you can make ends up being the most impactful thing? Is that true? Is the financial side that as impactful as they think it is? Or is it the passion for what someone's going to do that convinces someone to make arguably the toughest decision of their entire career to take their life savings and buy a franchise?
That's a very good question. I think the real answer in the experience, I've been doing this for about 10 years, helping people get into their first business typically, and or entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs getting into franchising because they understand the leverage points that franchisors bring to the table. So is it about the money? I think for the candidate, it typically starts with the money because they're in a position where they need to replace an income, right? So that's very important to anybody. And they don't understand exactly how that happens and how long it takes, right? So all of that stuff is very important for a candidate or anybody that's getting into a business for the first time. And so helping them understand that evolution from startup to speed to break even, to profitability, from profitability to how much money you can pay yourself, to business sustainability, right? That time period is very different for different industry segments and different franchise brands. And so we need to clearly understand that. But your question was, is making money, or as a franchisor, emphasizing making money the most important thing? And through my own personal experience as a franchise owner and as a franchise consultant and as an investor in real estate and other investments, money kind of sounds like the first primary thing, but really it's about learning. You know, if I look back on my own personal experience, the reason that you do something like start a business is because you think you can do it and you want the challenge, right? So and then it's income and the lifestyle that the income affords. So if we balanced, if we were a franchisor and we balanced the income potential with the lifestyle that the candidate really has in their own mind, we do a much better job of serving that candidate.
I think it's great feedback. We've lost Charles, technical difficulty. So you and I take it on for here until he pops back in. I mean it's a great insight, and I think the hardest part is franchisors are trying to balance what are the most important things to put in front of candidates. And you know, if I were to take all the franchisees I've spoke with, it's pretty consistent. It's the value of product. Like I have to believe in what you're selling, or else I'm probably not going to get into it. I can have my arm twisted maybe over the finish line if it makes significant amount of money and the cost to get in is sound. So if the investment fits how much I have and I can make a lot of money, I might be convinced that category makes sense for me when I wasn't all the way there. Then you have leadership. Do I believe this team is going to have my back and help me grow? Territory availability. Don't talk me into opening in a market that I don't want to be in. And then lastly, when I ask franchisees, would you do it again? There's not this like awkward pause of maybe. It's yeah, absolutely. I'm still growing with the brand, which then like I would like to see franchisors play up how many franchisees are still growing with the brand, because I think that's a true validator that I'm continuing to put my money into this because I believe in it. So a la Popeyes, where Popeyes Chicken in their big growth, you're looking at operators that own 100 units. Why? Because it was making money, it was sound, leadership, vision met what they wanted. Everything I just said aligned. So anyway, so when we look at the financial component, though, like franchisors have knee-jerk reactions. Do I put it front and center? And now, in a world where over the last 10 years, the item 19 has turned into such an important part of the puzzle of storytelling. Where does it fall? And I believe every human being has a different pathway to getting to yes. And unfortunately, in franchising, we're trying to simplify this and act like they don't. And that's the hard part, right?
Absolutely. I think that franchisors that have a very defined sales process also serves the candidate the most, right? Because you're right, somebody that's making a big decision in their life is, their brain is kind of all over the place, right? And it's not only the candidate, it's the candidate's spouse, right? So now you're managing two different persons' thought process about this big decision of starting your own business and charting your own path, et cetera, et cetera. So is there one size fits all? Not really. And even the franchisors that have a very good sales process, which is highly important in serving that candidate and getting them to be able to make a good decision, getting some of those franchisors to understand that letting the candidate vary off of that path is also very important, right? We see this year. So a traditional path is that you go through your due diligence, and then you are asked to go to Discovery Day. Well, now all the Discovery Days are virtual, right? So what was happening is the franchisors were positioning the Discovery Day and or the decision day, the confirmation of your due diligence, as sort of just another discovery call, right? And I'm finding that happening still. And I find that to be a problem. If the candidate hasn't done their due diligence, then why are we inviting them to a Discovery Day just because they don't have to fly to the corporate headquarters and it's not a big trip anymore? It's a virtual. That doesn't allow them to get to a decision in a logical path, right? And it also tries to speed up the sales process, which in many cases is not the best thing to do.
No, I mean, that's an excellent point, because I have it all the time. Brand X says, I spent $1,000 on pay-per-click last month and I got nothing. I go, well, wait a second. Let's look at the impressions. And I think impressions, for the most part, and most consumer things, are garbage, because a consumer product moving versus a B2B business purchase is a much different buying journey. So I say, wait a second. You just built a funnel for 6 months from now. And they're like, that's not true. I go, well, what makes you say that? Well, because I asked the last prospect where they found me, and they said Google. I'm like, okay, so when you go out and buy a car, you look in one place and it's one thing that makes you buy that car? Well, no, I do my homework. I take it for a test drive. I negotiate the price. I'm like, well, you're talking about buying a car, which is fairly simple, versus a franchise that's very complex. And you're right. I think we've been conditioned to speed up the sales process and force people into yes. And ultimately, when you do that, you're probably not qualifying the franchise candidate the right way. And you're putting them into a situation where the honeymoon's going to wear out and they're going to get frustrated, which is going to turn into non-validation, which is not going to help you grow your brand. So what you're saying and what I'm saying, it's the right pathway, but because this knee-jerk reaction, we got to sell, because we've been trained, if we're not growing, we're dying, is really complex when it relates back to franchising.
Right. Well, and here's the reality of the franchise world. Once you sell a candidate into a franchisee, you're just starting the relationship, right? Like, it's brand new, and the growth is for a franchisor is in the royalty stream. It's not in the franchise, the franchise fee and the onboarding expenses, et cetera. So, like you said with validation, a franchise brand that doesn't validate meaning the franchisees that are currently franchisees don't rave about the franchise and their experience and their ability to make money and execute on their goals that they had, then the whole thing falls apart. And so selling a bunch of franchises into, terrible operations or lack of success on the part of the franchisee is just a bunch of work. And if we're speaking directly to franchisors, every one of them out there understands how hard it is to build a franchise organization. And so I would emphasize selling for sales sake in any business is really not very beneficial, right? Like in businesses that I own, I always focus on revenue to the extent that it drives profitability, not revenue for revenue's sake. And there's lots of philosophies out there on that, but selling just to keep busy, or it just doesn't make sense to me, so I don't do it.
There's a great line in there, and then I want to ping you about just working with brokers, period. But what you just said, you're really fighting for profitability, and for some reason, a lot of franchisors look at their P&L and look at that franchise fee as profitability, when that's not the profitability. That's just getting a franchisee up and running. The profitability comes from royalties. So your same advice, franchisors need to think about that too. And I've always been surprised that a sales team is really judged on the sale versus the deal value. Because if me as a sales, let's say it's all internal, organic lead comes in, and that person ends up opening 3 units that each do $1 million. Now you're talking about 5% of $3 million, talking about $150,000 a year that's going to kick off back in cash back to corporate. Over 10 years, you're talking about $1.5 million. And then if you take conservatively a 5 times multiple on that, now the deal value is worth north of $7 million for that one deal. So if I go to a franchisor and say, all right, if I'm willing to give you $7 million over the next 10 years, how much are you willing to invest to get me? They're like, I don't know, $5 million? Okay, but you're trying to sell franchises with a budget of $5,000 per deal. Right. Do you see what's wrong with this? So I think it's an excellent point. What I'm curious of, and this is a loaded question, so I'm going to give a pathway so that you could decide what pathway. I'm not going to put you on a hot seat with this, but okay. I think more than ever, the franchise broker has become such a critical part of the sales process. My opinion is because the franchise broker localizes the experience in many ways that you can have a one-on-one relationship with someone who's going to make a life change. So the brokers have now developed great relationships within their communities or their states that creates some sort of organic lead generation that you can build a relationship with your customer. The reality is franchisors, maybe in Quiznos days where there were more regional developers, where it was more localized franchise sales, which didn't clearly work. That was selling for the sake of selling. But franchisors have a salesperson or a chief development officer and a qualifier. So it's not like the teams are in depth. So the broker community ends up being a very critical part to growth in today's world. What I feel is going to happen is there's got to be some level of transparency. No brands thrown under in this conversation, but I saw an email come from a franchise broker that says, it came to me, which you should be looking at my profile before you try pitching me on working with you as a franchise broker, because I already know how this works. It says, there is no cost to you, Nick. It costs you $0 to work with me. What? Not exactly, because my franchise fee has skyrocketed over the last 3 years because franchisors are widening it to pay the broker community more. So actually, I'm actually paying more than I would have ever paid to buy your franchise before brokers. And it's not wrong because the brokers have to have a model. But at some point, does transparency come back and say, hey, buyer, just so you know, you're going to pay a franchise fee. I'm commissioned on that franchise fee. And in some cases, it's going to be 100%. Or in the future, do we move to an FDD that has franchise fee and a broker fee? Because me as a franchisee, working with a broker, someone is actually helping me qualify. So there should be some costs associated with that to get to an even place. So loaded question to say, do you see things adjusting because it's gotten somewhat inflated, and that franchisors are convinced that if they pay David, I'll throw as much money as humanly possible at David. David's going to go sell me more franchises, which is not the case. You're going to find the best fits because you have a responsibility to your clients. Do you feel like we're on the verge of a different type of transparency in the way that brokers and franchisors work together?
I think that we're on the cusp of a change, right? And typically, when an economy turns over like this one is or will in the near future, there's all kinds of change that comes through that. You made a very good point as you were talking about a franchisor that doesn't understand the life value of the deal, and the multiple that the value they're creating in the franchisor based upon successful franchisees, right? And so the flip, and then you made the comment about organic leads versus broker leads. So the question is, I think if you went back 10 years when I started in the business, I think most franchisors, and there's actually a very good data on all the different broker organizations, the percentage of deals that are done broker versus non-broker, et cetera, that might have shifted, or emerging brands are bringing on broker relationships earlier than they maybe used to. But I think a couple things have shifted, right? So the cost of the franchise fee is going up because of the broker community is kind of one of the statements that you made. But the other statement that you made, I want to point out, if a franchisor is honest with what their customer acquisition cost actually is, whether they're using the broker community, the area developer model, or selling organically, right? The broker community seems like it's expensive by comparison. Although what is the alternative to not use the broker community, right? It is to spend more on organic leads and the customer acquisition strategy via internet leads and or advertising, right? Just like any business. So, you can own a commercial piece of real estate and fill it up yourself, advertise online, VRBO for commercial, there's a company called LoopNet or something like that, right?
Yep.
Or you can pay a commercial realtor like CBRE, and you're going to pay them a huge commission to do it. So, it really is, what choice do you want to make? That, what we saw in 2007 to 2010, 12, lots of area developer models, lots of them. Do we see those anymore? No. Why? Because the franchisor exit, it could cost too much on the exit. Because now I got to buy all my area developers out, and I'm going to offer them a multiple of X, and then I'm going to try to sell my business at a multiple of Y, right? So all of a sudden, brokers are getting a bad name because the franchise fee goes up. I call BS on that, right? I love that you started this conversation with what is the whole picture, because we're one part of a massive picture that franchisors want, which is to build a great organization, deliver lots of value to franchisees, and exit at a big multiple. Because, and 10 years ago, private equity wasn't drooling all over franchising like they are now. That's the reality.
Yeah, it's excellent points. Unfortunately, as much as this conversation is real, there's real and then there's perception in franchising. So majority of brands were like, oh, that's a good point. And you're like, how many deals do you want next year? I want 10. How many did you do last year? 5. What did you budget last year? I budgeted $50,000 for my 5. So you're going to budget 100 this year? Oh, no. I want 10 at the 50. And no matter how many times we go through the equation, they end up back at the place of, I want more deals for less money as fast as humanly possible. That's it. And it's interesting because if you look at then how do they support franchisees internally, COVID aside, because COVID definitely accelerated the support models, but majority of the time, franchisee comes into that system. Profitability is not the number one thing. The hand holding through probably the most stressful point, the build out or from training to opening, the hand holding has gone away. So now they're in this complete panic zone because they're spending money, not making money. Money's going out. What do I do? Did I make the right decision? And then franchisor is like, oh yeah, we're going to let a business consultant talk to you once a month. So it's like, there are so many easy ways to make this thing work, which is probably why 99% of brands will never see over 100 units, because they're unwilling to take a step back and do everything that you and I just talked about.
Yeah, well, I mean, you made a really good point as it relates to the, I lost my train of thought. The franchisor focusing on sales, right? And kind of the broker's role in that. I get my candidates as a franchise consultant to really think about the reality, right? So that was the point that I was thinking about. My job as a franchise consultant is to bring reality to the perception story, right? The franchise salesperson is going to make it sound easy. You can do a semi-absentee manager run business with 10 hours a week. I owned one, Nick. You can do that in the third year. And I tell candidates that. We worked our asses off, my wife and I both, for 2.5, 3 years. And then once we built a good team and had a good manager and learned ourselves how to lead, how to, the third year was great. We worked 10 hours a week. I worked very little. My wife worked 10 to 15 hours a week in the store. That's ideal. That happens in 36 months. So when I'm working with a candidate, I'm getting them to see a 3-year horizon towards business maturity. Franchisors talk about initial training and construction and build out and grand opening. I mean, that's nothing, because that's not making money and supporting your family. That doesn't matter. All of it's super important. I don't mean to diminish that. But what is my role as a franchise consultant and or a broker, and do I add value to the franchisor and the franchisee? I would like to think that I do, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this for 10 years. But what is that value? Bringing reality to the equation, bringing separation between perception and reality. And the way that I personally do that is through experience share. I've owned lots of different kinds of companies, franchise and non-franchise. And so what does it look like to be a business owner, and what can you expect? And what are some of the pitfalls that the franchisor is probably not going to point out to you or pay attention to or whatever? So, I think that the best way that we can serve franchisors and franchise consultants can serve themselves and the candidate is to be as real as possible.
Yeah.
You're not going to make a bunch of money in the first year, right? It's going to be more work than you ever thought possible, etc. Telling them it's going to be easy so that you can sell a franchise is a disservice to everybody in the equation.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that human beings in general think buying a franchise is an easy way to make money. And there's a lot of people that have that opinion. But if you think about, you take your next job, it's probably going to be tough. You're going to have to do a lot of work. You're going to work later hours. You're going to work your butt off because you're trying to impress that company that they made the right decision. You go and start your own business, even more so. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to, the systems aren't even there. So now you got to go back and create those systems. And if you look at the franchisor, go read any press release from 3 years ago from that franchisor and how they said they were going to have probably 100 more units than they actually have open. It's not easy for them either. So it's a fantastic insight. And I hope to close the loop on where do things go with the broker community. There are good brokers, there's bad brokers, there's medium brokers. Same with franchisors. That's everything that exists. A third. Yep. But for the good ones, I hope the next wave of how someone like you, David, gets incentivized is franchisor goes, hey, David, we're going to give you obviously the franchise fee, a giant percentage of it when the franchisee signs. But if they continue to grow with us, this is what we're going to do for you. And if they hit our milestone, let's say they go over our AUV, in our system, we're going to give you something there too, because now the shift is going to turn towards, David, go find people that can scale our brand, make us a lot of money, and in turn, here's what we're going to do for you. Because then the franchisor is going to get smart. They're going to realize the multiples that come on the work that you just did, and your value is completely seen. And it's not like, the brokers are a necessary evil. It's like, no, the brokers are building my business. And I hope that we see some shift with the better franchisors in that direction.
So just to solidify your idea, you hope that the broker community gets incentivized and compensated based upon the success of their placements, almost like a loss pool in the finance world, or so you get paid and or in the insurance world, the finance world, et cetera. You get paid a commission on the front end, but you're really building a portfolio of ongoing royalty stream based upon the success of the candidates that you placed. Hey, for some people, they're going to say, I just want to be commission only, and I just want to get the deal. I would welcome having the long tail end.
Yeah.
But frankly, Nick, I do more deals than most consultants in the country. I do more placements. My placements are typically more highly successful. I stay in touch with my placements over a longer period of time. It's not about the deal for me. It's about creating business owners, because in my mind, Nick, business owners make a bigger impact on their community. They make a bigger impact with their family. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm not trying to get a deal done. I'm trying to help people become business owners because they add more value to our overall, every community they're part of. They employ people, they impact their customers via their services. I'm a big fan, but do I see that happening? I don't know, man. The franchisor doesn't want to share on the upside. They want to get started. Is kind of my thought.
Yeah, and I think that when you incentivize your development team, when you incentivize the brokers that you work with, and even like brands that change the qualifications, if you need, for simplicity's sake, you need 100,000 liquid to buy in, and you change that to you need $300,000 liquid to buy in, so that we're looking at people that can scale. Like, the shift is going to have to be obviously profitability, speed to break even, profitability, and long-term deal value in a world where private equity is very hungry for these businesses. And frankly, this is why part of the reason private equity is so hungry is because franchisors don't run a tight ship, and they see how much money they can make by putting operations in place. It's very simplistic why they're buying them. They're not buying them to lose money. They're buying them because they see franchisors leaving so much money on the table. So
that's a good point.
But all of this means I do think a third of the franchise industry is going to make progress. And hopefully, in a time where the next round of layoffs, especially if there's any sort of issues with COVID as we hit Q4, the next round of layoffs are going to be the middle managers, and middle managers are amazing targets for franchisees because they wanted to get higher, they didn't. They got stuck in the middle, they weren't getting promoted. They made a little bit of money so that they have a little bit to spend. And now with turbulence, the paper pushers, who are the strategists in companies, that are going to get laid off because companies are going to say we need more doers than the people that are organizing meetings. There's going to be a giant pond of franchise buyers. So as challenging as this world is right now, this could be really good for franchising. So obviously, David, I appreciate this conversation. It was amazing. I wish you the best of luck. I will continue to follow your success and hope our paths continue to cross. Sorry to Charles for falling off. I don't know what happened to you, Charles, but we'll find you. But David, thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, Nick, I really enjoyed the conversation. You asked a lot of really great questions, and you have a very direct way of getting to the heart of the matter. So I enjoyed the conversation, and thanks for having me on your show.
Thanks, David. Take care.